All right. Hey everybody, how's it going? This is just a brief introduction for what this video is. This will be the second out of three videos. Um, Along with this, we will be having a meeting at a time to be disclosed on February 20th over Zoom. So just keep in mind. Um, so today we're just going to be going over requirements specifically for B and E, which is the amendments of the Constitution. Parts A, B, and C will be covered at the next Zoom meeting, next Zoom recording, along with the fifth requirement, and that will round us out. So yeah, thanks everybody, and I'm gonna pass it over. We're gonna start with the amendments.
All right, so we're going to be going over the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, or rather, I'll be going over the first 7 here. I just want to start this off with the first little preview that, or overview that the reason why your pamphlet puts these separate, the Bill of Rights is separate from the rest of the 27 amendments, or rather 17, but it's 27 total, is because these were all passed as one. These were these were rights that were, undeniable. They had to be, passed with, in addition to the Constitution. That's why you'll notice the date on all these. All 10 of these were passed at the same date, which is December 15th, 1791, which is about 3 years after the ratification of the Constitution. And it was the reason why they wanted to include it so quickly after the Constitution is because they wanted to make sure that these rights were really that our government would not abridge these rights or infringe upon these rights, I should say. So let me just share the screen here. You'll see really quickly here that these are all, I don't know if the Merit Badge pamphlet had you read Magna Carta, but I recommend reading that. They'll give you a good idea of where our founding fathers were really getting the idea for some of these rights. But it was all about representation. It was all about having a system of government that would be for the people, of the people, by the people, very transparent system. And a lot of that is gotten from the idea of the Magna Carta, which was England's own kind of Bill of Rights, or it was a predecessor to that. Didn't give that much power to the people, but it was a start. And our founding fathers saw that as a good influence on them, and they wanted to kind of continue that, but more so. Another key fact I was researching on this is that these Bill of Rights cannot be, these are the only 10 amendments that cannot be, they can't be overridden with a simple majority in Congress. Simple majority being, 51 versus 49% of, people in the House and the Senate that, want to override or repeal a bill or repeal an amendment. These are included as the first 10 as being separate from the other amendments because it requires a supermajority, which is defined as basically more than 2/3. So you really have to have a reason to repeal it. That they really wanted to make that these rights were, that these are pretty sturdy rights and they can't be just overridden, easily. So I'll be getting into the first 7 of these a little later, but this is just a quick overview of that. All right, so First Amendment here is basically it protects your religious liberties, your right to assemble, your right to free speech, freedom of the press, and your right to petition the government. So basically your right to speak out and make your voice known and heard and express your opinions. This is all protected in the same amendment here. The founding fathers thought that this would be important to include as the First Amendment because that is basically how you have a transparent system of government. This is how our republic, our democracy, our system of representation is able to function, and it's through the exercise of free speech and the exercise of your opinion and your rights regardless of whether or not they are popular or they're unpopular, or if people think it's hate speech or if it's not hate speech, whatever it is. It is your right as an American citizen to have these opinions, whatever they may be. And it could be offensive, it could be inoffensive. Uh, our founding fathers thought it was necessary to have a system of government that was transparent, and because of that, they needed people to be able to freely speak what's on their mind and freely express what is their beliefs and their opinions. And from that, we are able to engage in a dialogue and engage in um, a civil form of debate. Without this, you wouldn't really have representation because everyone would be made to think the same way. Um, so this is truly the foundation of what the rest of these amendments are based off of, and really the rest of the Constitution and just the government in general. It's all about checking the system, and it's about putting the government in check because they are not above the law, or they are not above us. Rather, we are above them. They are to serve us. So rightfully so, they are to protect our rights as citizens to to have free speech. All right, so Second Amendment here is right to bear arms. I'm pretty sure most of you probably knew that. Just given recent, there's a lot of talk about how can we really interpret the Second Amendment, especially in school, the school shootings and all that. I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to get into that, but basically, I'm just going to talk to you about what really this amendment is about. So right off the bat, it's bear arms and the right to form a militia. What that means, at least to me, and at least to the book, to the merit badge pamphlet, is that you as an individual have the right to bear arms and to protect yourself, as well as we as a collective whole of citizens, civilians, people that are not of the government. We have a right to protect ourselves and to form a militia, to form a kind of military unit that is not that's not from the government. It's kind of a grassroots, I guess, form of protection. So I have some notes down here that I was looking at here. Basically, it's just like the First Amendment, and then it guarantees um, you to have the ability to hold the government accountable. So the First Amendment, it's more of civilly holding the government accountable, in terms of when I was talking about petitioning the government. Um, this is a kind of more defensive way of petitioning the government, or rather just holding the government accountable, because an armed populace, it means that it's a good thing for a country. It means that there's a lot of transparency, and it means that the government can't override certain rights that you have. Even if the First Amendment is not protected, you still have the Second Amendment to fall back on, because that is a way that you can protect your own rights. It's acknowledging the fact that, even if we have the Bill of Rights, even if we have all of this that the government should be protecting, at the end of the day, if the government is not protecting that, you as a citizen have a right to protect your rights actively through how you see fit. Obviously, there are stipulations to this. You can't, you shouldn't be actively going out, and trying to incite violence. This is, the founding fathers saw this as more of a right to be on the defense, to protect yourself. If someone's going to come on your private property and try to invade your personal space, you have every right as a citizen to defend yourself. So that's pretty much what Second Amendment means. I could go into various different details, and I'm not going to, because that's not really what I'm here for. But if you're interested in really learning more about the Second Amendment, I recommend just looking up a lot of the civil court cases or even the Supreme Court cases that were dealing with this sort of idea of what the Second Amendment, how it should be interpreted. They're really interesting to look at. It's just food for thought. All right, so we're going to be going over now the Third Amendment, which is funny because notably, this amendment has not been heard in any Supreme Court cases. So it's kind of interesting. This really, you would think it really doesn't have that much relevancy to this day. It still does, I would say, but not to the same extent the Second or First Amendment does. And the reason why is because it was actually born out of a different time during the French and Indian War, when the British government required of its citizens to house and hold the British troops. So the British troops during the French and Indian War were sent over here, and they were to protect the British American colonists. And to do that, the government said, well, if we're going to protect you with our troops, then that means that you need to house and clothe these peoples, which at the time was seen as I guess it still is a pretty big invasion of private property. So the founding fathers just saw this as, if we as citizens are going to have a standing army, we should not have to require them to quarters a fancy term, but basically house these troops. Looking at my notes again here, this is interesting because there is an exception to this. Congress can pass a law requiring us to house troops in times of war, but that's the only stipulation, which given how it is nowadays, we really haven't been considered in a time of war since really the Vietnam War. We've had the Iraq and Afghanistan war, and the war since Vietnam. The government has classified as conflict, so we've not really been in a time of war since Vietnam War. So ideally, Congress has not had, or they have not had the power to pass any law that could usurp this amendment since that time. Again, there are other amendments that really get into this issue of invasion of private property. So that's probably why this not has really been heard in judicial court as a case. So this is just interesting to go into. And again, if you're interested in more of this, there's a lot of great resources on the internet. A lot of, I guess, .govs and .orgs that they have. I think OYE is one of them. I think OYE.org. I think that's spelled OYEZ, I think. And basically that's just a free nonprofit resource that documents a lot of the Supreme Court cases and interpretations of the different amendments. So that's something interesting to look into if you're interested. But that's pretty much it. All right, so we're going to talk now about the Fourth Amendment, which this is a little bit more relevant than the Third Amendment, but it's actually funny. It's actually kind of similar in its meaning. The Third Amendment I talked about kind of deals with kind of invasion of private property. That was more in a literal sense. This is more in a figurative sense and in a larger sense, and it's more of from the government themselves. They can't invade your property without your approval and without having reason to do so, as it says, in that amendment. Unreasonable searches and seizures. It's a fancy way of saying that you have every right as a citizen, or no, the government does not have a right to search your property just out of whim and just because they feel like it, or just because they can, because this amendment protects your right as a citizen. It says that you have a right to your own private property, and that it establishes a barrier between what is public and what is private, and that the government can't pass that line, and that you have every right to your privacy. So notably, this actually came up a lot about a decade or two ago during the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, with the passage of the Patriot Act, in which the government had full authority to listen into our conversations over the over landlines or over telephones or over cell phones, and it became an issue. Whether or not that was justified or not, I'm not going to get into that. There are good reasons on both sides to really say that that was a whether or not that was a good idea, but the the point is that this actually did come up as an issue in the Supreme Court a lot, in the fact that many people, excuse me, many people were questioning, you know, is this kind of passing the line a little bit? Is this verging on, infringing upon our Fourth Amendment rights of private property, and then just as of privacy, the idea of privacy, of the government can't, um, you know, without reason search your private property. And in a sense, it was interpreted that your phone calls with other citizens, if you're calling your best friend and you're talking about something kind of personal, um, it basically says, it has been interpreted that you have every right to privacy in that conversation, and that the government should not have a right to listen into your conversations. So that's actually pretty interesting that this has come up in many cases. Next to the first and second, and I believe the fifth, the fourth is the Fourth Amendment is it's it's up there with it's had a lot of cases that have been heard and appealed to the Supreme Court through this. So again, you can research this on your own if you're curious. I believe your merit badge pamphlet will talk a little bit more about this, but it's generally a good right to remember. All right, so the Fifth Amendment. This one's a big one. Uh, includes a lot of kind of different rights that are all fairly similar, so they included them as one amendment. But basically, if you want to get the short and skinny of it, it's grant includes grand jury, double jeopardy, self-incrimination, due process, and takings. So, what specifically are those? Well, grand jury just means that all trials of indictment, so anything that you're brought to court with, will be held among the jury of public witnesses, a jury among your peers, basically, um, which means that there are witnesses to how you are being indicted. Just again, it's to show transparency. Double jeopardy. It's a fancy way of just saying that you can't be tried for the same crime twice. It's transparency, but also it goes deeper into the fact that if you've already been punished for a crime and it's that same crime, you've served your time, you can't serve your time again for that. Now, if you commit the same crime again, that's different. You'd be serving your time for a different time, even though it's the same crime. But they are specifically talking about, say you go rob a bank or something and you just do it once. Yeah, that's a really bad thing to do, but you served your time for that. And that's basically what that's referring to. Um, Self-incrimination, it's basically you can't be duped into or falsely kind of manipulated into admitting your own guilt. Basically, there's a lot of lawyers or people in court that can try to sway you into saying a certain thing and admitting that you're guilty even though you're not guilty, or you know it's all about phrasing. There's all these loopholes and stuff in trials of indictment. So basically, this amendment protects you against them falsely incriminating you based off of maybe you say something that you didn't really mean to say, or it came out wrong, and they're saying they kind of use, for instance, if they use a lot of double negatives and they say, "Oh, so you didn't not do this crime," or something like that. And you go, "Oh yeah, yeah, that's true." And they say, "Oh well, you admitted to it." Stuff like that, kind of manipulation that can't occur. Due process is there should be a lawful judgment of your crime. So again, that kind of goes with jury of peers and the fact that it keeps that keeps the lawyers and practitioners and all the legal people to task in that they can't do anything unfair. They have to go through the trial of due process. That's you know there has to be a fair way of doing everything. And then takings, which I don't, I guess that's not really a current terminology. So the I think there's a different term in your merit badge pamphlet that describes this, but takings is basically the government can't punish one person for the public crimes of many. So say if there's I don't know, like I can't think of a good example, but say there is a class action lawsuit or something occurring where there's multiple people that are at fault. Like with the 2008 recession, there was multiple people in the high up, banking industry that were, or the bank, people in charge of the banks that were all kind of responsible for handing out too many loans to people. So it wasn't just one person that had to suffer the consequences, it was many. And if one person did suffer the consequences, that would be against the Fifth Amendment. So it's, again, the Fifth Amendment is kind of a really large and encompassing amendment, but it's, if you want to think of it, it's almost like your rights as a criminal, if you're a criminal or if you're being charged as one. Um, you have protection from our constitution or from our Bill of Rights against any wrongful incrimination. So it's something that I definitely recommend you looking into more. Don't just take my word for it. It's actually pretty interesting to look at. Okay, so Amendment 6. Again, this kind of goes with Amendment 5 and kind of Amendment 4, the whole rights in court and as a someone who's being accused of a crime. This kind of just carries it out to the next step. Fair and public trial, pretty much as it sounds. You must have a public, must be among a public court. Again, jury among your peers. So it's really emphasizing that point of transparency. Defendant must be told of your, if you're being accused of something, you have to be told what you're being accused of so you can defend yourself. Um, Basically, we give everybody the chance of being innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty. So you may be suspected of a crime, but you have not been ruled that you are actually guilty yet. So we tell you in advance, we say, these are the crimes you're being accused of. Here's what you need to defend yourself against. Please provide evidence. If you claim to be not guilty, please provide the evidence in court so that you can, defend yourself. And then I was doing further research into this. This actually, I found out this not only guarantees a fair treatment to the accused, which is, again, it's transparency and all, going into all that I've said earlier, but it actually makes the process a little bit easier for the courts because it helps make a more accurate trial to catch the real criminal. So when you have a fair and public trial and it's not, you're not out to get an innocent, say if there's an innocent person and there's people in the court they're out to go get this innocent person and they say, well, we're going to wrongfully convict him, even though we know he didn't do the crime, but we're going to, say that he did it anyways because we don't like him. Um, Meanwhile, the real criminal is still out and about and they've escaped the crime. This helps actually catch the criminal because it provides that you have to have a fair trial and it has to be among, non-biased jury members as close as it can get. And that way, what that ensures is that the one who's going to be accused of the crime and the one who actually ends up being guilty is more likely to actually be guilty. So that way, we actually catch the criminal. So that's actually very important on both sides, not just from the accused standpoint in that, if they're innocent, it protects them, but also from the standpoint of just the public itself. They don't want to have criminals running around while the innocent are being convicted. So uh, it's something to look at. This is an amendment that is actually heard quite a bit in by the Supreme Court a lot. So it's kind of interesting to read about. All right, so number 7 here. This will be the last one I'll be sharing with you guys, but uh, this one is a little confusing because, or at least it doesn't really seem that relevant, but it actually is. Just like Amendment 3, it's kind of taken, when you read it, it's taken out of context from the time it was in, so it's a little confusing. It's still relevant, but it's not as relevant, I would say, as the other amendments, just because just by looking at the fact that um, it's it's not really heard a lot by the Supreme Court. Amendment 3 and 7 are really not. They're kind of just there. There's not much issues that are brought up modern day with it, but it's still important to note, the reason behind this one, and that is that it guarantees that in civil courts or just in lawsuits, both parties, so defendant and the accused and the accuser, basically, um, they can rightfully request juries in cases that are more pressing. So it gives the ability that, if there's something that is more pressing, there's an issue that um, requires more transparency, they're able to get that. If you have to pay a traffic ticket, usually you go to court and it's just you and the judge, and they'll tell you what you've been accused of or whatever. Which, again, if it's a traffic ticket, it's really not much. But if that happens, and if it's a more pressing issue than that, usually a jury of peers will be included in the mix. So that way, it just, again, it goes back to Amendment 6, which is enforces that there is a or establishes that there is a fair and public trial. So again, all these amendments kind of interlock with each other. You can't have a First Amendment without a Second Amendment. You can't have uh, a Sixth Amendment without a Fifth Amendment. You can't have a Seventh Amendment without a Sixth Amendment, and vice versa. It's these are all. You'll see that these are all. At least the first 10 amendments really were designed to kind of be, locked together as one Bill of Rights, not just an amendment here, an amendment there, and then maybe sometimes we can repeal one. No, this is supposed to be all encompassing. So there's really not much else to this amendment other than it's just about transparency between you and the public and the government, and it just ensures that our system of government is not tyrannical, and that power is decentralized, and that every citizen has the voice to speak their mind and have their opinion heard and defend themselves. So again, Seventh Amendment, it's not that popular, but I would still recommend researching into it because it's still interesting to look behind the history of it.
All right. Hey, everybody, how's it going? So we're going to be going over I'm going to be going over amendments 8 through 14. So we're going to start with Amendment 8, which is cruel and unusual punishments, basically meaning that they're not going to be excessive bail. So if you do go to jail, you're not going to be charged, $1 billion for simple theft. Also, no excessive fines or, as it says there, cruel and unusual punishments. So, such as you're not going to be put to death for simply stealing a car. So it kind of ensures that the justice system is fair and equal treating in all proceedings. Then we go to the Ninth Amendment, which is citizens' rights, basically meaning that there's parts of the Constitution that shall not be denied or disparaged to other people. life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, certain rights that just, no matter what anyone tries to do, can never be taken away. And then to finish off, the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 and only amendments that can't be changed in the Constitution. We have states' rights, which basically says that powers that aren't delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution or prohibited by the states are reserved to the states or the people in the states to decide. So this includes laws that just aren't amendments yet and will go on by a state basis. Great example of this was women's suffrage, which we'll be going on to later. Before it was an amendment to the Constitution, it was determined by the individual states whether women can vote, hold public office, things like that. And then once it became an amendment and part of the Constitution, then all the states had to adopt it and be part of it. So as I said, that finishes out the Bill of Rights. So we're going to continue on to the 11th Amendment, which is lawsuits against states, basically meaning that prohibits federal courts or state courts from hearing certain lawsuits against individual state, mostly between states versus citizens of other states or states versus the United States, things like that. It's not up to the federal court, it's up to the Supreme Court. And this was to help delay some of the parts of Article 3 of the Constitution that left some ambiguity. Gosh, I can't speak. There. All right, so then we go on to the 12th Amendment, which is presidential elections, which basically kind of just sums up how to be elected as president. It talks about how voting works, how people are voted into office, things of that nature. It is one of the more obviously important amendments as it sets up parts of the Electoral College, just overall interpretation of how elections are run and how certifying in elections happened, all that kind of stuff. And then we move on to the 13th Amendment, which is the abolishment of slavery, which is one probably most people know about from history class, as it's one of the more well-known amendments, and basically states that know that slavery, except as a punishment for individuals for criminal activity, shall exist within the United States or any place under its jurisdiction, basically outlawing slavery except as a punishment for a crime. And finally, at least for my part, is the 14th Amendment, which defines what a citizen is and how a citizen is signified as like who's a citizen of the United States. Basically describes if a person is born here or they're naturalized in the United States, they become a citizen of the United States through other processes. It talks about, the processes you have to go through in order to become a citizen of the United States. It also, because of when it was, deals a little bit in Civil War debt, and along with that also equal protections under the law. This goes hand in hand with the abolishment of slavery, and then defining citizenship kind of solidifies what it means to be a citizen, especially for all those who were just freed from slavery during that period of time. So yeah, that is my parts of the amendment. Thanks, guys.
All right. Hi guys. My name is Sean. I'm going to be going over citizenship in the nation amendments right now, if I can figure this out. All right. Sent. So I'm going to be going over 15 through 20. We're going to start with male suffrage. This amendment was passed, and it was passed during Ulysses Grant's presidency. It was essentially if made so that black people could vote legally after the end of the Civil War. And the gist of it is generally if you were born, if you are a male citizen, regardless of your race, you are now allowed to vote. And this would be further deterred down the road, and it would be further supported by Amendment 24, which is not written correctly on the Google Doc. That says 14. That is incorrect. It's supposed to be 24, which is the abolishment of poll taxes and other such things that people tried to do to prevent African American males, specifically in the South, from voting. The next amendment we'll be covering is Amendment 16, which allowed Congress to tax your income, and that was the percentage was up to their discretion. I believe right now it's like 30%, and that's subject to change according to the Senate's discretion. But that's mostly what it was, as they did not have the constitutional power beforehand, and many of them did. There was a large debate in Congress about whether or not they had that power, and in order to just make it official, they passed the amendment. Amendment 17, as you see here, was more about Senate elections, how they were elected, so that really established more of the process. Most of the fine details were still and are still left up to the states, as you saw in Georgia with runoff elections, where if a candidate does not get over 50% of the vote, they will have a runoff election instead of just the majority. But this kind of developed sort of a rubric that all states had to follow to elect people to the federal Senate. Then you had the 18th Amendment, which was focused on the prohibition of alcohol. This came during 1919, I believe, under the Woodrow Wilson presidency. And it was really a lot of those amendments passed in this time were kind of the idea of we're going to be progressive, we're going to be clean cut, well-rounded people. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z, bad character habits. And this later proved to be kind of frowned upon, kind of the government trying to control you and say, oh, you can't do this because it's viewed upon negatively. And you can see it did not end well. And it was very quickly overturned. The next amendment, Amendment 19, was for sure passed in 1919. I believe the 18th was passed in 1918, actually. But this allowed women the right to vote in all elections. So in order to kind of produce this equality that you saw evolving, especially across Europe, with classical liberals, and the belief that people have these inherent rights and they're guaranteed by God and they're protected by the state. Equality was a huge one of those, and equality that you saw in America. But one of those huge things was women's rights that you didn't often think of. They were sort of left by the side for a while, but as you can see during the early 19th century, especially World War I, post-World War I, they really took massive leaps forward with feminism, women's rights, and all of that stuff. And they would stall out for a while until about after World War II, really. This was sort of the major thing women really wanted until about the 1960s Vietnam era, where women fought for equality in jobs and all of that. And then you get to Amendment 20, which was the focus on presidential terms. Don't remember what year this was passed, but this was essentially the focus of, we really don't want to have another president like FDR, who was there for 4 terms and could have been there for up to 12 years had he not died, and possibly even longer. So he was president for over 12 years, which was really frowned upon. It wasn't viewed as something that was good. It was viewed as sort of what the founding fathers tried to escape in sort of a king-like figure. And that was one of the key things. And the reason they chose to was because of what George Washington did, which seems kind of obvious, but the simple 2 terms is now the term limit for presidency. And I believe that possibly quite soon we might have a 28th Amendment where they'll introduce congressional term limits, so you don't have those career politicians who essentially become billionaires out of being in the Senate for 4 years. That's being introduced by, I believe, Ted Cruz, but that is not yet an amendment, so we will not officially talk about that. But presidential term limits and conditions under which, and that was the real key point, was we don't want someone to become this sort of hierarchical figure in America like FDR did. There are nuances to it, like as you see with, I believe, Harry Truman, who took over after FDR passed. He was technically there for 3 terms, because when you're vice president and you become president, that does not count as a term against you. So you are still up to 2 more full terms. You cannot go to 3 full terms or over, but you are allowed to go anywhere beneath that. So most often it becomes 2 full terms, and then they will step down. Thank you, and you will move on to your next brother for the rest of the amendments.
And now we're moving on to the last 7 amendments. These 7 amendments, not a lot, well, everybody knows about them, but not a lot of people have them memorized just because they're way towards the end of the list and kind of new. Amendment 21 it ended the prohibition that took away alcohol from the making of states, and that allowed states to start producing that stuff again. Made the money, yeah. And Amendment 22 limited the president to 2 terms. Now, an easy way to remember this one is 22, 2, 2, 2 terms. So that's just a fun memory tool that I heard somewhere. But this was put in place because they didn't want presidents to just be able to get put in over and over and over and over again, because that would just be kind of a monarchy rather than what we wanted to have. Amendment 23 allows citizens of Washington, D.C. to vote for national elections. Now, before this amendment, they were not actually allowed to vote. So this made it so that they could vote, since they are part of our country. Now, this is put in place because that definitely seems a little unfair to just have that one little section out in D.C. not allowed to vote. But this fixed all that up, so that's all good now. Then we have Amendment 24. Amendment 24 ended the poll tax. The poll tax was a tax you had to pay in order to vote at elections. This kept a lot of lesser off people from voting because they didn't have the money to pay for it, or they didn't want to spend that money on something not as useful as, let's say, groceries or housing or food. So ending the poll tax allowed everyone the opportunity to vote. Amendment 25 identifies who will fill the positions of president and vice president if those persons happen to leave or are somehow otherwise unaccounted for. What this means is that, let's say the president of the United States somehow disappears, gets kidnapped, or gets assassinated or something, then the vice president would go into his office. But then let's say that happened to the vice president as well. Then you would have someone else, I believe the Speaker of the House, but I'm not entirely sure on that. And then it just has this really, really, really long list listing everybody who would take office next if the person above them got somehow unable to serve in office. Then Amendment 26, this is one that a lot of people are grateful for, but I think some people don't like for whatever reason. And that sets the voting age from 21 to 18. What this means is people who are 18 are allowed to vote because they are working, paying property taxes. Now, people who are 16 can also work and pay taxes and stuff, but they don't get to vote. So it is what it is, but at least it's a little closer to being fair. Then we have Amendment 27. Now, this is the final amendment so far. Some more could still be added. But Amendment 27 says that any pay raise Congress votes for itself will not take place until after the next congressional election. Now, that might sound a little wordy and confusing, but basically what that means is Congress can't say, hey guys, you know what? Do we want more money? Let's just vote on it. Because that's a little unfair, don't you think? So what this means is that if the congressmen are like, I want more money, guys, do you want to vote on that? Then they can say that, but if they vote for it and it passes, it's not going to take effect until probably after those people have left. So this kind of discourages that act of being like, I want more money, let's vote on it. Because then it's like, I want the money, but I don't really want to let the people who come after me have more money because I want the money. So that's kind of what that does.
All right, thanks guys for listening, and as always, as the same was with the last one, please make sure you answer all the questions in the Google form and submit the Google form after you watch the video. Please do that, and if you haven't done the first one, you still have time to do it. Now on to the most favorite part, which is homework. I know a lot of people did not submit the first homework assignment before this video went out. Please have both the previous homework, which was requirements 2 and 3, and the current homework, which is going to be requirements 6 and 8, submitted before the next meeting, I believe, which is March 4th. Please have this done, as that's the only way you're going to be able to get the merit badge. I know who sent me their homework and who didn't, so please make sure you do it. As for going on to what the homework is for this week, that will be requirement 6, which is choose a speech of national historical importance, find out about the author, write it or type it out into a Google or Word doc about the person who gave the speech, the importance of the speech at the time it was given, and how it applies to citizens today, and choose a sentence or two from the speech that has significant meaning to you and explain why it's important. If you have any questions about this, I know especially because we obviously can't meet face to face, and you want to make sure that your speech is either approved or not. Please, you can come on to the Zoom meeting that will be, I believe, February 20th at a time to be determined. I'll be sending it out most likely Monday or Tuesday on the time that we'll be doing it. But if you have any questions about what speech you can use or not, please feel free to stop into the Zoom meeting, ask us questions, let us know. And then finally, requirement 8. So this one is going to take a little bit of work and time, and it is a little bit more difficult than the other homework assignments. At least part of it is. So in a Google Doc, again, or written or a Word doc, please name your 2 senators and the member of Congress from your congressional district in your state, and write a letter about a national issue and send it to one of these elected officials, sharing your views with that person. And obviously share a Google Doc with your counselor with us about what your letter was. If you handwrite your letter, perfectly fine just to take a picture of it and send it in. If you get a response, you could also send it to us, but sometimes people won't get responses for months, and I completely understand that. We just need to make sure that you actually sent the letter out. So please just bring us the letter, whether it's in Google Doc form, Word doc form, or written form. Just make sure we have it so we can sign off the requirement for you guys. So that's it. Thank you all. As I said, this is the second meeting. There'll be another one on March, I believe, 4th. But I'll also convey that further on February 20th. The time for that Zoom meeting is to be determined. I'm not entirely sure yet. I will be letting you know at Tuesday at the latest on when that next meeting is. The Zoom meeting, it is not required for you guys to show up. If you feel like you want to, or you have questions, or you just want to talk to us about some things, that is perfectly fine. We're more than happy to. We'll be on there for the full amount of time that it is. But otherwise, that's it. Have a good day and a great weekend. And we will see you on Zoom, hopefully. But if not, you'll hear from us on March the 4th. Thanks, everybody.